My name is Mike Hosted. I'm a vice president here at ATBS, and today I'm going to be sharing with you our mid-year owner-operator trucking trends update. Got a lot of really good data here that I'm happy to share with you. I had a lot of really good questions on the registration. I'm going to get to as many as I can, especially the ones that were the most commonly asked. So, first thing we always like to start off with here at ATBS is what is going on in the trucking industry? What is the economic environment of trucking right now? And I think we all probably have some kind of sense on what that is. But I'm going to give a little bit of context here, and I'm going to back up a little bit and kind of look what the whole year's looked like for us, because it's been a little bit of a strange year, despite it being a down year overall. And so what I want to start with is when we did this call 6 months ago, this is the slide I shared at that time. And this is from our friends at truckstop.com, and this is their index in terms of freight. And this is the spot market. So this is rates going up and down very quickly in the spot market, meaning, this is excess freight that spills over after the contract market basis. And so this one really stands the test of time, and it's really a leading indicator of the strength of the trucking economy and the trucking environment. And so again, this was from way back in February, but I wanted to give some pretext here to kind of show you what we've been through this year. And so what we're looking at here is on the left, this is the number of trucks per one truck looking for a load in the spot market at truckstop.com. And this really is a good indicator of time, like I said. So if we look here in 2018, we had a really strong freight environment where there were a lot of loads in the spot market, meaning there was just excess freight. There wasn't enough trucks to haul the amount of freight needed out in the spot market. And so what that does, it's a supply and demand balance. There's too much freight and not enough trucks, so shippers have to pay more money in order to get their freight hauled. And so that happened in 2018, and the rates went all the way up to $2.42, even after you back out the fuel surcharge. And so the 2019 and 2020 were a little bit rougher. And then we hit the pandemic, where right at the beginning, freight was at an all-time low. It was going for $1.54. The world was kind of shut down, right? And then the pandemic hit, and freight just went through the roof. And we had about 2 years of the most freight we've ever seen. And especially in that spillover spot market, at the peak, we saw about 240 loads per one truck looking for a load in the spot market. Because there was so much freight and so few trucks, rates went all the way up to $2.74 a mile at that time, even after you back out the fuel surcharge. So freight went crazy, and it seemed like it was never going to end. And then all of a sudden, here we hit a cliff, and call it the war in Ukraine, call it inflation. Everything kind of fell apart all at once here in early 2022. And we went down to the new equilibrium where we're running, 50, 60 loads per truck. And we've been running at about $1.86, $1.88 per mile, even after you back out the fuel surcharge. So again, this is from the spring. What I wanted to do next was, let's look at what happened in April. We had a crazy start to Q3, and then at the beginning of Q1, and then at the end of Q1 and at the beginning of Q2, we actually saw freight skyrocket. And so it just felt like things were getting a lot better really quickly here in April of 2025. We were actually all the way up to 112 loads per one truck looking for a load, and rates went all the way up to $2.17 a mile. So up 30 cents, 31 cents from the bottom that we hit, way back in 2022. So it looked like things were getting better, but then we fast forward to today, and we've fallen back off again. And there's a lot of reasons for that, I think, but I think the main thing that happened was shippers actually moved a whole bunch of freight early because of tariff worries. And so people were loading up their warehouses, their docks, and things like that, where there was a lot of uncertainty about what was going to happen with prices. And so we had this really big false start here back in March and April, and we call it kind of falling back down in terms of the volume of freight, but the rates went all the way back down to the bottom. So this is still a month old. As of today, I actually got the report yesterday from Truckstop. We're actually sitting at about 95 loads per truck, which is actually pretty good. It's the best we've been since the pandemic, but rates are still sitting today at $1.87. So I guess you could just say we keep getting these false starts and false stops, but we're still kind of bouncing on the bottom, meaning we're at equilibrium. We're not getting worse, but we're not getting better. And so again, that's the spot market. That's a leading indicator because as we saw, that moves really fast. Anytime there's a quick demand surge, rates go up really fast, as does the volume of freight. So that one's a leading indicator. Anytime that goes up quickly, usually it's a sign of good times to come. This is actually the Cass Freight Index. And so this involves major shippers, major contract rates. And so this is a more stable environment that changes a lot slower. And that's because contract rates usually go out and you bid for 12, 24 months at a time, meaning that rate gets locked in place for a longer period of time. So, the mega carriers of the world go out there and they negotiate with Walmart and Procter and Gamble and all those big manufacturers, PepsiCo, and they lock in rates for long periods of time. And so this is what that Cass Freight Index is measuring. And this slide here is actually shipments. So this is volume. This is the amount of freight that's being moved at any given time. And so I like to look at these blue bar charts here. And again, it stands the test of time. Anytime freight's good, we see volume go up on a year-over-year basis. Anytime freight gets tough, it goes down on a year-over-year basis. We hit the pandemic and freight skyrocketed like we've never seen before, and it was going up for a couple years. We're actually in the biggest contractionary period of the amount of freight moving that we've seen on this index. And this goes all the way back to 2010. So again, we had a good year in 2018, down in 19 and 20. We were up for 2 years. Now we've been contracting in freight volume for the last 2.5 years. And I just saw a slide yesterday that was shared with me, and it's one more month out. And I believe last month it was down another 9% year over year, meaning we were way down here this month. So what that tells us is the amount of freight being moved in the contract market continues to go down on a year over year basis. And we've never seen it happen this long. And so there's a lot of reasons for this. I would tell you one of them is almost certainly that just people aren't spending as much money, right? I mean, stuff costs more, and so people just aren't spending as much money on these items that get moved by a truck. People aren't buying furniture, TVs, Peloton bikes, things like that. So that's one part of it. But I'll tell you another thing that happened. Here in 21, 22, there was so much freight that needed to be hauled in this contract market that what these shippers had to do is they had to diversify and they had to move freight over into that spot market. And when they did that, they moved it in the spot market. They moved to brokers, truckstop.com, things like that. They moved it over and they haven't brought it all back. And so what's happened is we've diversified where these major shippers are moving their freight, meaning this could be just the new normal where we're just having less freight in the contract market because there's more brokers than there's ever been, and there's more freight in that brokers market than there's ever been in the past. So that's volume. Volume's important, right? Because there has to be volume for us to move in order for rates to go up. And this is actually rates. And so again, I like to look at these blue bar charts here. These are important. And so again, remember, volume was up in 2018. And so rates went up on a year-over-year basis in 2018. Volume went down in 19 and 20, so rates went down in 19 and 20. And then when that volume skyrocketed, we saw rates go up like we've never seen before, for the longest we've ever seen before. And again, it looked like it was never going to end. And then everything happened in 2022. And now, again, we're in a 2.5-year contractionary period in terms of rates. So this means if you look here, rates were down 20% year over year in 23, beginning of 24. But what's exciting here, and I say it's exciting, but it's not bad news, is that we're actually flat and even up the last couple of months in contract rates. So that means we hit the bottom. We've been bouncing on the bottom, but we're starting to see little bits of light that, hey, we are going to see some steady upward trends. Hopefully in the near future here. There's no magic wand on that, but this is exciting, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I've been hearing out in the field here in a couple minutes. So that's very important, right? Volume is very, very important. Rates are just as important because they shadow it. Next, this is from our friends at DAT. This is capacity, and so this is the number of motor carriers entering and exiting the marketplace over time, and this is important too. Because again, it's trucking. It's a very delicate, supply demand curve that we're working with here. Anytime there's demand, we need more trucks to haul it. Therefore, rates are going to go up. But anytime there's a supply shortage of trucks, rates go up. Anytime there's a supply shortage of freight, which we have right now, the number of carriers has to exit the marketplace. And so that's what's been happening. If we look at this over time, again, we look here But prior to the pandemic, we added motor carriers at a consistent basis with a couple little downturns here and there. But as GDP grows, as the number of people grows, we expect there to be more motor carriers, and that happened consistently. Then the pandemic came, and we added the most motor carriers we've ever added for about 3 years straight. And what happened here was there was that great freight, there was so much to haul, there was really good rates. We just added way too many trucks, and then all these trucks were stuck in the marketplace when freight fell off a cliff. Now we're seeing the number of motor carriers fail out of the marketplace at a rate we've never seen before. So again, if you look prior to the pandemic, we had a couple little contractionary periods here and there. We're now at about a 3-year contractionary period with a blip here and there where some people are entering the marketplace, but we're actually seeing more exits than entrants. Unfortunately, this is a good thing because we're seeing the amount of freight go down, and we're seeing some other things, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But with freight volumes going down and us needing that rate to go up, we need motor carriers to fail in order to get back to equilibrium, which it seems like we're really close to, if not at and passing. But we do need failures in the marketplace in order to get to that equilibrium, and then to get to that point where there's more freight than there is trucks, so that rates can start to climb back up. And hopefully it happens a little bit slower this time. So what are we seeing and hearing? I'm fortunate enough, as are others here at ATBS, that we get to work with tens of thousands of owner operators. So we get to talk to you all every day. We get to work with hundreds of motor carriers out there, talking to them about what's going on in the trucking environment. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what I've been hearing, because I've been out on the road talking with carriers, talking with drivers, and everybody out there on what they're seeing. And so what we've been noticing is that some of the smaller fleets right now are struggling. They're actually struggling a lot with turnover. They're struggling to find good drivers that stay there, and the quality of it is just a little bit lower. Large fleets are actually winning back 2 to 3% rate increases, and they're getting better volume. So some of the biggest carriers I've seen, and you all would know their names, but some of the biggest carriers in the country, they're starting to tell us they're getting really good volume back finally, meaning they're up 8 to 12% in the amount of freight they get to haul over the next year. So those contracts that they're dealing with their major customers, they're actually winning them back, where in the pandemic they were losing them to smaller fleets and they were losing them to brokers. So we're starting to see bigger fleets win back more freight, but they're also getting them at better rates. This is most likely due to some of these smaller fleets that are having service failures. So when these brokers and shippers diversified into those smaller fleets, well, we just saw the number of carriers leaving the marketplace. That means a lot of smaller fleets were failing, and they're failing to deliver loads. And when that happens, shippers then tend to move back to major carriers to make sure they get that lane hauled and they get that freight delivered. So the other thing I'll say, though, and this is important, not all small fleets are failing. So how are independents surviving in such a prolonged down market, right? I mean, we just looked at it. 3.5 years of a very tough spot market and a very tough broker market. So how are these independents surviving? And I'll tell you, we had a pretty big failure rate at the beginning there when this first all started. A lot of them were the folks that got into this spot market right when things got tough, or right when things got good. And they had a high truck payment. They thought this is just how trucking was. And they failed out pretty quickly when rates went down and they couldn't afford their fixed costs and things like that. They just had false expectations and couldn't succeed in that type of market. So how are these others surviving? Well, everything's changed. There's so much technology now that's helped these small carriers and independents get the same advantages that the big fleets have. And I think about things like a lot of the fuel services out there. There's so many good fuel cards, so many good fuel, apps like Mudflap and Greenlane and things like that give huge purchasing power that's aggregated through these apps to the independent driver. So you can think about a major carrier that has 20,000 trucks. They, of course, have huge purchasing power because they buy so much fuel. Well, these apps and these fuel cards, they're gaining the same power for these independents. Not only that, but these, load boards and brokers and things like that have increased technology to where there's better visibility, there's better negotiating skills and things like that. So it just seems like the world has gotten easier for independents on their own because of the massive amount of money that came into trucking during the pandemic. It's actually caused a lot of savings for that independent carrier in this tougher marketplace. And so what I would tell you is we saw a lot of failures in that first year, maybe year and a half in this downturn. But those that have stuck it out in that independent market, they have something figured out. They're really good at negotiating. They have really good lanes that they have dedicated between shippers. And they have low costs where they just know everything. They know their fixed cost per day, their variable cost per mile. They know where to run and where to not run. And they're just very good business operators, and they know what they're doing. So it's actually amazing. Usually when there's a prolonged downturn like this, we see all these independents fail. And we did see that for a little bit, but you would think in this type of market, you would see more drivers failing out of that independent market. But we've kind of come to equilibrium there where the technology and the head on a lot of these drivers' shoulders has kept them in business. And they're actually doing better right now, despite the market, which we'll talk about here in a minute. I had a lot of questions on the registration, and I appreciate everybody's questions about foreign driver capacity. That's a huge question mark right now. I do believe there's a lot out there. You see it in the news. You hear about the administration that's in place that's starting to take steps towards it. You hear about the border shutting down drivers that are coming across where they're supposed to bring one load over, drop it off, and then go right back. But then they come over and run for a month and haul it at really low rates and take drive rates down for us here. So there's just a lot of question marks there. I do believe there is quite a bit of foreign driver capacity, especially that don't speak the English language. So if there is enforcement, that is going to accelerate this upturn that we're hopefully heading into right now. And we don't want it to go fast again. We don't want this to be the pandemic where we go up 40% right away, and then a bunch of people buy a truck and a bunch of people run loads, and we flood the market with the capacity again. We want this to be stable this time. We want to go up slowly over years so that's predictable and so that we don't flood the market with trucks again, because that happened and it caused the biggest downturn we've ever been a part of because of that. So we want this to be more stable this time. And I think this could be part of the equation, but it's still unknown. And then again, as I already kind of alluded to this last bullet point, fleets that have survived are managing through efficiency. This is just the new normal right now, right? We're at the bottom. This is where we're at. So how are we going to run profitably right now? And we'll talk about that here in a little bit and give you a clearer understanding of what you need to be doing and what our most successful drivers are doing. Because again, even in this down market, I'm going to show you our best drivers are actually accelerating in what they're doing. So it's actually pretty exciting, and you wouldn't think it would be because it's been so painful for so long, but I have some pretty cool data that I'm about to share. So that's just the economic environment of trucking, setting the table, if you would. It's still tough. Things are still not great. Rates still aren't great. There's still not a lot of freight, but again, there's some exciting things that we got to share. So what we're looking at here, we've got a lot of data here at ATBS. We've got 20,000 owner operators who we work with on a yearly basis, and we're accountants. So we're really good at smashing data together and making it meaningful for you all so that you can see what's going on and hopefully give you some tips to come out of here with, better business practices for yourselves. So the first thing we're going to look at is revenue analysis. Revenue analysis is important, and the first thing we're going to be looking at is miles. Miles are important, right? And so miles are up on a year-over-year basis, and we expect this. Anytime freight gets tough, we see miles go up on a year-over-year basis. And so we did start to see miles go up quite a while ago. They continue to go up. They are up just 1.7% to 94,000, call it 95,000 miles right now. And you can see in the bottom right here, I have it separated by segment. Independents, people out on their own authority, dry van running right at 100,000, refrigerator just under 101, and flatbed 86,000. But we do continue to see miles go up on a year-over-year basis. I probably would have expected to go up a little bit faster than this, but there's quite a few reasons for that. But we'll talk about that. So here is a very interesting chart. We've been fortunate enough to have been in business 27 years now, and we've been tracking this data for 22 years. And anytime, as I alluded to, anytime things get tough in trucking, like they did in the Great Recession in 2009, drivers have to work harder to make the same amount of money. And that just makes sense, right? When you get less per mile, you got to run more miles in order to make up the difference to keep your income the same and pay for the bills. So that happened the Great Recession. 2018, we talked about freight got really good. Miles went down. Anytime freight gets good, miles go down because drivers don't have to work as hard to make their living, right? It's just simple math. 2020, 2021, things went up a little bit. And then we hit the pandemic where freight was just through the roof and miles fell off a cliff. where drivers just didn't have to run as hard. They got to go home and watch their kids play football. You all had a better life because life was easier and there was more freight and it was at a better rate, right? And so you all had life better and it was awesome. And we loved it here at ATBS for our clients, for everybody involved. And then it all happened here in 2022. Things got tougher, rates got tougher, and you all had to start running more miles in order to make up that difference. We are still not at pre-COVID levels. I'll show you this next chart that's important to me. And I think it's important to a lot of people, especially to understand what this means. And so why this is important is because prior to the pandemic, everybody was running, if you look at the top here, right around 100,000 miles pretty consistently. I mean, this was very consistent for a few years where we were between 100 and 105,000. The pandemic came, and again, hats off, why not? I mean, if you're making really good money and you can go home more, do it, and you did. But we lost 15,000 miles from 100,000 down to 85,000 miles per owner-operator in just 2 years. And that was a huge drop in the amount of miles that were driven in the United States. And if you want to back into the math, which I did before this call because I was so curious about it, if we take out 15,000 miles per owner-operator in the United States, and we multiply that by the roughly 350,000 owner-operators in the country, that means we lost about 5.2 billion miles of capacity in 2 years. So 5.2 billion less miles driven by owner-operators. That means it took 50 to more like 60,000 trucks in order to replace those miles when there was all that freight to run. And guess what we did? We added those trucks. Trucking companies bought more trucks. They bought more drivers or hired more drivers. We bought all those trucks and we hired all those drivers and we put them into the marketplace. Then all of a sudden things got tougher and now we're running more miles. But guess what? Those trucks didn't just disappear. And so that's what's caused this prolonged freight recession, is that we have this, call it shadow capacity, that our friends at JP Morgan have been saying. We gained all those trucks, but now we're gaining more trucks back by running them. And so if we think about this 85,000 to 95,000, that's another 40,000 trucks of capacity we put back in the marketplace, plus all those trucks we added. So by adding trucks to the marketplace because people weren't running as hard, then by starting to run harder, we have a long way to go here before we're back at equilibrium. But I think, again, we're getting closer because we have seen a lot of failures, not only with the independents, but I'm sure you all see the news. There have been quite a few large trucking companies that have started to go out of business fairly recently. So, I see it fairly often recently, where companies that have been in business 70, 80 years with hundreds of trucks are going out of business. Again, unfortunately, we do need that to happen for rates to normalize. So let's keep moving here. We got a long way to go, but we got lots of time and lots to talk about. So next, revenue per mile. And this looks like it hurts. Down 7 cents a mile. But what I'm here to tell you is this is 100% fuel surcharge. And so I want to skip this pretty fast. And the reason is, again, we're at $1.82 average, and that's across all segments. If you look down here in the bottom right, in the spot market, we're about $2.07, dry van $1.70, reefer $1.75, flatbed $2.02. So yes, it does look like it hurts to be down 7 cents a mile. But when I back out the fuel surcharge, which is important, when you back out that fuel surcharge, we're completely flat for about the last year. So it's that same narrative where we've just been bouncing on the bottom. When you exclude fuel, yes, rates go up and down, but it's mostly because of fuel the last year and a half. And so when we exclude that fuel, we aren't getting worse in terms of rates. It just feels like it because it's been painful for so long at this point. So rates are just totally flat in the spot market and in the contract market right now. We're at the bottom. And again, there has been that narrative, and I have heard it from many fleets, big and some small, that they're starting to see that 1 to 3, maybe in a few more points percentage increase, which again, it doesn't seem great, but we don't want to go up 40% again and then run into the same problem a year from now. So next, and I had a lot of good questions about this exact same chart. Does it make sense, or when does it make sense for me to go run in that spot market versus run for a motor carrier? So when do I take my truck from a motor carrier and put it in the spot market? When do I take it out of the spot market and put it at a motor carrier? And this stands the test of time as well. we think it costs about 48 cents a mile more to run on your own versus running for a motor carrier. The reason for that, you can see all it listed here, but you got to pay for license permits. The additional insurance is exceptionally expensive. This 12,500 is probably low. Your first year in business is probably more like 20,000 more. And then as you get your safety score better, it drops down pretty quickly. You do have a trailer expense. You have to book, bill, and collect your loads, which often involves factoring. And then the operational losses are really what hit. That means you've got one trailer, right? You have to back up and wait for live unloading. You have to wait for loading. You don't have a drop and hook setup with 1,000 trailers and a bunch of that setup, so you lose a lot of time when that happens. And so that's why it costs about 50 cents more a mile, or about $52,000 more a year in expense for you to go run in that spot market versus the average motor carrier. These numbers are all generalized, right? And everybody has different exceptions to their own rule. But why this is so cool is it stands the test of time. And when I just looked at the pandemic, I could back this out further, but this is what matters is the last 5 years. And during the pandemic, at the peak, you could make $1.36 more a mile, and it only cost you 48 cents to get there. That's a huge net gain, where, of course, drivers were going to run the spot market because they could just print money doing so. But literally, the war in Ukraine started, and we fell off a cliff in 1 month, where it went from very profitable in the spot market, making 70, 80 cents more a mile in the spot market, to actually losing money for most in the spot market if you were just out running the regular load boards. Now, again, there's a lot of individuals that have good contracts or dedicated lanes that know what they're doing and have it figured out. This doesn't apply to all you, but this is just a general sense of what it takes. If you want to join now, this is probably what you're looking at. Unless you've got really good connections and really good, things that are already established. And so, again, we keep getting close where we bounce up. It looks like we're going to pass. Again, earlier this year, it sure looked like it was going to look like the spot market was going to be the place to be again soon, but we just keep kind of falling back off. And right now, you can make 33 cents more a mile in the spot market in terms of revenue, but it costs you 48 cents more in cost. So it's going to cost you 15 cents more a mile net to your loss to go run the spot market if you just jump into it and you don't have a very significant plan with everything figured out. And so I'll go through this one fast. The bottom line is down here. If you were to just jump into the spot market versus the average contract carrier right now, you're likely to lose about $19,000 in net income ability. So pretty big losing proposition. But again, that's generalized. It just means if you don't have a plan, it's going to be tough sledding right now. So gross revenue down 2%, down to 172,000. And again, this is pretty much all fuel. So again, I'm not going to look into this much. And you can see the different segments here in the bottom right. It's interesting that despite the miles being widely different, the average revenue always sits at about 175,000 for the average owner operator out there. So we'll keep going. Next are costs. Costs are important. The reason costs are important is, there's two things you can control in this business. You can control how much revenue you generate, and you can control how much money you spend. It's really that simple, right? And so we'll talk about that more at the end, but first, we're going to look at fixed costs, truck payments, trailer payments, insurances, things like that, and then variable costs like fuel, maintenance, communication, things that move up and down. So what I like to say is fixed costs are parked costs. These costs are going to happen when your truck's parked or if you're moving. It doesn't matter. These are non-moving costs, and then your variable costs are your cost per mile. These are both important, but they're both important to have a handle on. So fixed costs are up 2%. On a year-over-year basis, up to about 57,500 for the average owner operator. So you can do the math, you can back it out in your head. Just under $6,000 a month that the average owner operator is paying. Not 6,000. Just under 4,800 that the average owner operator is paying in fixed costs. But the important thing is it's about 60 cents a mile. And so the great thing here, though, 2%, it's not a lot, and this is stable. We actually expect fixed costs to go up. Truck payments are going to go up over time. Insurance is going to go up over time. That's just the nature of it. The nice thing about this is it's predictable. During the pandemic, we would have 1 year where fixed costs were up 10%, the next year where they were flat, then up again 8%. That's hard to manage when it goes up and down so quickly. This is very predictable and very expected and actually below inflationary levels. So this is actually stable and predictable, meaning we can set a budget and we know this budget's going to be stable. And we can use our budget to help predict loads and understand where we need to be. So what about variable costs? Variable costs are, again, very important, and it's also the one you can control the most specifically your fuel. And variable costs are down 5.6% on a year-over-year basis, about $3,800. Again, all that's fuel. So fuel costs have gone down, and if you look at the year-over-year basis, especially on this line chart, a lot of that came in the second half of last year. When fuel was going down, we had a big gain in variable cost that actually went into our bottom line. And so that was a really big win when costs were going down for us in terms of our cash flow. So total cost down 2% on a year-over-year basis, about $2,600. And if we look at the month of June, the average owner-operator is paying about $1.26 a mile to their truck right now, or to operate their truck in this current environment. Right? So what about fuel? This is exactly what we already kind of covered. But revenue was down 7 cents per mile. Fuel was down exactly 7 cents per mile as well. So that's why I wasn't really worried about the revenue being down, because fuel was down the exact same amount. And when we remember talking about it, the revenue per mile when we back out fuel is exactly the same. So not a big deal here. It was a nice cash flow advantage again here in the second half of last year. It seems pretty stable. I mean, I know you all run different regions and things like that. I personally just look at the national average, and the national average has been hovering in the 370 to 375 range for quite some time now. So very stable. And again, the reason this is nice is it's very predictable. We can operate our truck knowing our fixed cost per day and our variable cost per mile pretty accurately. It's not going up and down rapidly. Therefore, we can choose profitable loads more easily right now because we know what our costs are, at least hope we do. And if we do, then we can really make educated decisions on profitable lanes. So what about fuel mileage? Fuel mileage has kind of leveled off, and I won't spend too much time on this, but fuel mileage has really leveled off here in the last year. We saw it dip in the pandemic because drivers had no incentive. You all had no incentive to run faster. I mean, why would you, right? There was such good rates, and you could just, make so much money by taking another load and running faster. Now that things have got tougher, a lot of drivers have switched, and slowed it down out on the interstate. It's important to do that. And we'll talk about the cost savings of that here in a little bit. But, the general rule of thumb is, for every mile per gallon you slow down or that you gain, you're going to gain, about $10,000 in income. So the difference between 6 and 7 miles per gallon is about $10,000 in income to your bottom line. If you have time to slow it down, you do that. I know you don't always. I know it's not always appropriate. I know it's not always safe even, right? But, the bottom line is if you do have time on a load, slow it down, because every penny you save in fuel goes directly into your pocket. You can make more money. If you make another dollar, sure, it's great, but it costs you 60 cents to get there. So that dollar you made, you only probably actually made 40 cents of it. But for every dollar you save, you get to keep the whole dollar. And so that's why fuel is your biggest cost, but also the one you control the most. So this is busy, but the bottom line is revenue was down 3.7%, fuel was down 11.8%. So revenue was down 3,600, but fuel was down 5,500. So yes, revenue was down, but our fuel cost was down even more. And what that means is we really had a net gain in cash flow and net income when that happened. So what about truck payments? This is a big topic right now. We had the big announcement on Friday about tariffs. Not sure what to make of that yet. Don't have a lot of educated information on it. But truck payments continue to go up. We had a huge surge in 22, 23 where it really, really went up. What's so interesting though is, just 2 years ago, our average truck payment, 3 years ago, our average truck payment was $2,300 a month. It's all the way up to $2,900 a month at this time. So truck payments have really, really gone up, and it's going to be a very, very interesting truck market for the next few years. And I was actually pretty optimistic until Friday about used truck prices. I thought used truck prices might actually have a chance to go down here in the near future until this tariff hit. But now I believe with this tariff on foreignly made or foreignly manufactured trucks of 25%, we're going to see less orders on new trucks. It's already really low right now in terms of the number of new truck orders, meaning our pipeline of used trucks coming up is about to get thin because major carriers, nobody's buying new trucks right now. They're too expensive. They're about to get more expensive. Plus, we're not making enough money to go pay 160, 190,000 for a new truck right now. So we're just not seeing that. Drivers are running their trucks longer right now. But ultimately, what this tariff could mean, and what I've heard, is that fleets are going to start looking in the used truck market because new truck prices are going to go up. And so that tells me used truck prices could actually go up when a week ago I might have told you they were actually going to go down. So this is going to be pretty unstable and pretty unknown. I don't have a magic wand for this at all, but this tariff thing is going to be a pretty big deal for truck prices, as they're almost certainly going to go up. So maintenance. What about maintenance? This is one that scared me a year ago, and here we are, and it hit. We had some things happen, but maintenance up 10% on a year-over-year basis. That is a huge number. Up $1,200. The average owner-operator is paying $13,000 a year in maintenance. Again, if you look over here in the bottom right, I have it out by segment. And then if you look at these line charts here, the average owner-operator in June was paying about 14 cents a mile for maintenance to their truck. And so that's a number you should know, but every truck's different. But I'll tell you what's happened here, and it's a lot of things. A couple of them we know that are very, very obvious. Parts cost more, labor costs more, and people have been running their trucks longer, right? That's very obvious. Miles have gone up on people's trucks. People aren't trading them in because people aren't buying new ones because they can't afford to. So those three factors are very obvious, that maintenance has gone up because inflation, but because we're also running our trucks longer. And anytime we run our trucks longer, guess what? We're going to have more maintenance on an older vehicle. That's all there is to it. But something else that I really think has probably contributed to this is going to have to do with deferred maintenance. Anytime there's a tough maintenance or a tough marketplace, drivers tend to put off their maintenance for longer because they can't afford to do some of the simple things. And that's what's happened here. And I'll show you, I'll go kind of quick here, but this chart really shows you what happened. So things got tough in 22. We were paying a lot for maintenance here. And then we kind of just fell off a cliff where when things got tough, drivers stopped fixing things they didn't have to on their truck. And now we're going up. And so this is on a cost per mile basis. It went down here. Now we're going back up at a really rapid rate. And then if we look at total costs, we're skyrocketing to the highest we've ever been in terms of monthly maintenance costs. So again, I think it's all those factors, right? Inflation, shop rates, part rates, people running their trucks longer, but then also deferred maintenance has come back into the picture. The last time we saw this was in the Great Recession. The last time we've had a really prolonged down market, we saw deferred maintenance. And while this one isn't as bad as it was back then, I just don't think it can be because there's so many sensors and things that'll shut your truck down now. So you can't defer as much as you used to be able to, but you can defer some stuff, and it looks like we're starting to see that happen. So what about net income? Net income is the fun stuff, right? We do this to make money. And that's the bottom line, right? We aren't doing this to go out there and, live away from our family or anything like that. We are doing this because we gotta pay the bills and we gotta put money in our pocket. And so don't be alarmed by this first slide, because this first slide does include turnover, and I'll explain that, and I'll back out turnover here in a minute. But turnover, unfortunately, is a part of trucking. Drivers move around a lot, and unfortunately, when you move around a lot, your net income goes down because you have weeks where you're not driving. You have weeks where it takes you to get up to speed at your new carrier, things like that. So we have a lot of turnover in trucking where drivers do move around a lot. And when that happens, net income goes down. And so when I factor that into the equation, the net income is up 2.5% year over year to the average owner operator, $64,524. I again have it broken down by segment here in the bottom right. Flatbed is up considerably, up $5,700. We are starting to hear good things in flatbed, and drivers are making a lot more money. Independents are up, and this is crazy, right? The people running the spot market are actually up, and that's what I'm talking about. The good operators that are still in that spot market, despite things not actually getting better, they're actually making more money, and they're making adjustments to do so, which we'll talk about here in a second. So I want to go fast here because, again, this includes turnover. We're going to talk about what happens if we don't turn over here in a second, because that's what's important. What we do when we put our head down and we do the right things. And so net income, this is over time. And again, it ebbs and flows, right? Things were really good in 2008. We fell off a cliff because of the Great Recession in 2009, 2010. We've been making slow gains for years and years. We went through the roof here in the pandemic, and then we fell off a cliff, and we've just been bouncing on the bottom. So we hit the bottom in late 22, early 23, and we're starting to see it really slowly go up. But if I look at this bottom chart, it's flat in terms of the net income per mile. And so what that tells me is those drivers that are running the extra load, taking those extra miles to work a little harder, their net income is actually starting to go up. And again, it's been 3.5 years of a down market, but we're starting to see net income go up. And then I'm going to skip to this next slide because this is the one that's important to me. And the reason this is important to me is this is the clients that have been with ATBS for over a year. And this means a year continuously. We have a lot of clients that'll go to one carrier, leave that carrier, go to another. We actually consider them terminated in that interim because we like to track this turnover stat, meaning if you stay at your carrier, if you're doing the right things, what's going on with your business? How much money are you making? And if you look in the middle right, all the way over here, if I take out turnover, those drivers that have stayed at their carrier for at least the last year, their average net income goes from $64,000 to $87,640. That is huge. That's a 35% jump in net income by not turning over and not jumping around and doing the right things. And I realize not every fit with every carrier works. There's no doubt about that. I understand the industry. But what I can tell you is there's a lot of successful carriers. There's a lot of people at carriers that some people consider not successful that make this much money or more. What's exciting too is if we look at Q4 of 2023, this is when we bottomed out. This is when everybody at ATBS bottomed out. Things were fantastic in the pandemic. We fell. We bottomed out in Q4 2023. Those drivers that aren't turning over, that are sticking with it, what they're doing, their net income has gone up every time we've done this study for the last 2 years. And so again, we've talked about it. Nothing has gotten better in trucking. Rates haven't gotten better. Things haven't gotten easier. I mean, it's just been tough. But our top earners, especially our top 10%, they're making huge gains every single session here with nothing changing in the marketplace. And so what are they doing? They're taking that extra load. They're watching their fuel mileage. They understand their contribution margin. They know their fixed cost per day. They know their variable cost per mile. They're really just focusing on the numbers, looking at their P&Ls and making sure that they're doing the right things every single day as a business owner. And again, even in a really tough market, we're seeing really good gains from our top producers that aren't moving around. So super exciting stuff for me to see that's actually happening. So again, this is the value proposition. Does it make sense to be an owner operator? You used to have to run 139,000 miles to make 47,000. Now you have to run 95,000 miles to make 64,000. So it's gotten easier in terms of the amount of freight you have to haul and the number of miles you have to haul, but it's gotten a lot harder with regulation, right? Like with ELDs, with safety, with hours of service, all the stuff you got to deal with in regulation is really hard. But for me, I would delete this 64,000 because if you're a good owner operator and you're on this call, you're probably one of those good owner operators. You're probably running 9,500 miles and you're probably making 87,000 a year, which means you're up here off the charts. So good owner operators are thriving even in a down market, even in a tough economy. And it's not just trucking, right? I mean, if you look at any type of news, there's corporate layoffs all over the country right now. It's just tough. It's a tough environment right now overall. So let's keep moving because we've got a few more things to cover here, and they're all important. I had a lot of questions about this. How does the one big beautiful bill impact owner operators? And this is important. This is a big deal. There's a lot of really good things that happened in this bill for small businesses, especially for owner operators. And so we're going to talk about that here for a few minutes. So what about the big picture? What is the one big beautiful bill? It was passed in July of 2025, earlier this year. And the first thing that one big beautiful bill does is it makes tax cuts from 2017 permanent. And so that was the Trump administration's first bill. It was called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And in 2017, we slashed tax rates across the board. And that was for the next 8 years. And what happened was we slashed all these tax rates, but then over time, they've been creeping back up, and they're actually higher. They were higher earlier this year than they were prior to 2017. But essentially what this one big beautiful bill did was it put those initial tax cuts from 2017 back in place, and it made them permanent. So tax rates have gone down across the board. We'll look at some charts here in a second. It's added some new deductions and credits for small businesses. We'll go into that in detail. And then it's created some certainty in the tax code, like tax cuts, but it's created a lot of complexity as well. So I'll get into some of those details. So one of the big things for you all as independent contractors is the qualified business income deduction. The 20% deduction is now permanent. And so, I guess the easiest way to look at it is this example at the bottom. If you're an owner operator and you made $100,000 this year, you actually get to deduct 20% of that $100,000 profit as a deduction. Meaning, if you made $100,000 profit after all your expenses, you get to deduct $20,000 additional dollars out of that profit, meaning you're only going to pay taxes on $80,000 instead of $100,000. So you still put $100,000 in your pocket, but you only have to pay taxes on that $80,000 of it. So this is a really big deal for small businesses like yourselves, where, hey, we get 20% of our net income. We don't even have to pay taxes on. I wish I had that. That's awesome. That's a really big deal and a really big benefit that was passed in this bill. So what about the tax brackets? I mentioned this already, but there are 7 tax brackets. They're permanent now. There are inflation adjustments. What that means is the brackets are going to move in terms of like, where do you fit in the bracket? And then the standard deduction is permanently higher, and then there's personal exemptions. And so here are the new brackets, and you can just look at them yourselves. Let's just look at single, for example, on the left here. You can see the tax rate. And the important thing to know about this is people often get confused about these tax brackets, and they say, oh, I made $102,000 last year. I want to make sure I don't make $105,000 and pay 24%. What you have to realize is this is a progressive tax system. And so let's say you make $150,000. You're going to pay 10% on your first $11,925. You're going to pay 12% on the next bracket here. You're going to pay 20% on the next bracket here, 24% in anything in this bracket. So it's progressive, meaning even if you make $150,000, you're only paying 24% on $103,000 to $150,000. And people often get confused about that. So don't slow yourself down because of these tax brackets. Keep working, because this is a progressive tax system. You don't get penalized by making more money. You just go up. As you make more, that higher level gets then taxed higher, but not the beginning level at the bottom. Anyway, these are the new brackets. And again, what's going to be adjusted for inflation are these values here. So this 0,000 to 11,925. Next year, this might be 0 to 12,500. That's what the inflationary period is. But these brackets are now permanent at 10, 12, 24, 32%. So hopefully that makes sense. So again, standard deduction went up. This is a big deal. I think about 95% of ATBS clients file the standard deduction, meaning you get more tax deduction from the standard deduction than you do from itemizing, which is like mortgage interest, health costs, charitable donations, things like that. And so single, it went up $750 a year. Married filing jointly, it went up $1,500 a year. Either way, this benefits the average taxpayer with less taxes. So what else? What else has changed? 100% bonus depreciation has been reinstated through 2030. What does that mean? If you go buy a new truck today, you can write the whole thing off in the first year. And so let's say you spend 50 grand on a truck, we can write $50,000 off that year. Normally you would have what's called a depreciation schedule, and you'd write part of it off one year, part of it off the next year, part of it off the next year. We often don't advise our clients to do this because, yes, it's wonderful in the first year, but then it's pretty painful in the next ones. This is something we'll talk through you individually with as a strategy each year when we're doing your taxes, but it is possible now. And sometimes this is a good thing. If you're out buying your second, third truck, maybe you have a really high tax year and you do need to write that whole thing off just to get things under wraps. Section 179 expense limit has been raised and it's more flexible. Basically, the bottom line is buying new or used trucks and trailers is now more tax friendly than before, meaning there's a lot more flexibility in what ATBS, your CPA, whoever can do for you. Meaning there's, instead of there being, hey, this is the way we have to do it, there's a lot of different scenarios we can run through in order to get you the best benefit over the long term or short term, whatever you need help with. So let's keep going. What's next? Everyday deductions. You all probably saw this. I know we posted it quite often, but the per diem deduction went up, the biggest it's ever gone up. It's now $80 a day for a full day, $60 a day for a partial day. For whatever reason, we only do 80% of it. So $64 a day for a food deduction every day you're on the road, 48% or $48 a day for every day you're out a partial day. A full day means you're out 24 hours. A partial day is generally a day where you left or came back to the house. But that's a big deal, right? I mean, our average client's probably going to get somewhere around $18,000 in tax deductions for their per diem this year. So hopefully we're not spending 64 bucks a day on the road in food. I mean, if you eat out of your truck, you eat healthy, you spend 10 bucks a day, we're still going to write off 64 bucks a day for you. So big deduction, big deal, and this is permanent. What about the senior deduction? There's an extra up to $6,000 extra if you're a senior, and it does get phased out at higher income. There's a personal auto loan interest deduction of up to $10,000 a year. This is for cars and trucks, and it's very specific that they have to be purchased from 2025 to 2025 to 2028 and manufactured within the United States. So don't go buy a car for this deduction. But if you are buying a new car and it is manufactured in the United States, this is a nice little kickback for you. And then tip income, if you got a spouse or something, you can, you can not pay income on up to $25,000 of tips. So what does this all mean for you all? What does this boil down to? Lower taxable income, number one, right? You're not going to pay as much in taxes with that 20% tax income deduction, with the tax brackets changing, with the standard deduction changing. Most likely, people are going to pay more taxes going forward, or less taxes going forward than they did in the past. There are different business write-offs now, and there's more flexibility in terms of the tax planning code. So big deal, all good stuff for owner-operators. Pretty exciting for sure. Here's a link, and again, you all will have this shared with you, but if you just search ATBS OBBBA, which is One Big Beautiful Bill Act, this will pop right up on your Google or whatever you use for your search engine. But we put out a full ebook explaining all this. I think it's 10 or 14 pages, and we took the 700 pages of code and we made it, what does it mean for owner-operators? So you can go get this for free on our website, and it gives you every detail you need to know about what this One Big Beautiful Bill Act did specifically for you all. So hopefully you appreciate it. Hopefully you can use it. It's free. Go get it. Share it with your friends. We did it for you all. So next, I want to talk about this, and we talked about this last time, because this is the most important thing in any business, is your contribution margin. So contribution margin is your revenue generated minus your variable costs that you incurred to generate that revenue. The money you have left over is your contribution margin. This is so important. Revenue minus variable costs equal contribution margin. And so the reason we need to know this is because every mile we drive, there's going to be revenue, there's going to be variable costs. And so what that contribution margin is going to do is, for the first however many days, is going to pay for your fixed costs, right? And so that's what we need to know. We need to know our revenue per mile. We need to know our variable cost per mile. We need to know our fixed cost total. And then what do we need to do in order to cover our fixed costs? Because essentially those first 2-3 days, depending on your fixed costs, you're running for flat, right? Because all you're doing is paying for your truck payment, your insurances, your plates, your IFTA, or not your IFTA, your FHUT, things like that. So those first few days, you need to know this, like, how many miles do I need to run before I even start to turn a profit where I'm taking money home? And this is just so important for drivers to know. But then the important thing is, after you hit that fixed cost mark, your profit per mile is through the roof. And so I want to look at a couple examples here. And we did this exact same thing last time. So if you joined us, I apologize for being redundant, but it's so darn important. And so what does an extra load mean? And so let's just look at this one on the left here. One more load per month, call it a 500-mile, one-day trip. The average revenue right now is right at $1.83 a mile. 500 times $1.83. That last load, you're going to make a $915 to your truck. You've hit your fixed cost. That contribution margin hit your fixed cost. Variable cost per mile, 70 cents a mile, probably actually more like 65. I didn't fix that. Your contribution margin, that means on this last load, you're going to be making $1.13, $1.18 a mile. That means that one extra load per month is going to make you $550 to $600 per month that you actually get to put in your pocket. And so this is just so important, because that extra load means your whole contribution margin, your whole revenue minus your variable costs, goes directly into your pocket. And so that profit per mile is absolutely fantastic. And if you do that for 12 months a year, you run an extra 6,000 miles, you make $6,700 a year. And if you do that over here on the right, 2 more loads, and over the course of the year, it's 13,500. And so this is what our best drivers have done. They've taken that extra load and they've cut their variable costs from 70 cents to 65 cents. They've increased their income by running 1 more load a month and cutting their costs from 70 cents to 65 cents by slowing it down and doing the right things. And by doing so, their net income continues to go up despite nothing else in the marketplace changing. So that's what's going on. That's what's helping people. That's what you can do today. And I highly recommend, if you don't know these costs, or if you haven't updated them with us here at ATBS recently, call your business consultant tomorrow and go over this and set up a new budget and figure out your contribution margin. Figure out what your revenue per mile has been averaging. Figure out what your variable cost per mile have been averaging. How many miles do you need to run in order to cover those fixed costs? And then how many more miles do you need to run after you've covered your fixed cost to hit how much money you want to make? Because I know you have that number in your mind. And if you do, we can calculate it for you. Here's how many miles you need to run to cover the fixed cost first, and then how many more miles you need to run in order to take home how much money you want to. And that is not hard for us to do. We can do a new budget. We can monitor it with you weekly, monthly. We can look at the numbers and we can get you there. So if you're struggling, if you're not sure about these numbers, if you're not even with us, give us a call. We'll help you get there. Because again, this $1.13 or even $1.25 a mile, depending on how you run your truck, that's a huge amount of money that you can be making if you're doing the right things right now, even in a tough market. And as I said, I do believe things are starting to get better. I mean, we're starting to see contract rates creep up, and things are probably at equilibrium now, but we're going to start to see more failures. And as we see more failures, that equilibrium is going to shift in the driver's favor for the first time in a long time. And if you're doing these things now, before things get better, when things get better, it's going to get even better quickly for you, and you're going to be very happy that you did all this. So a few last thoughts. And I can't say this enough, extend your range. I know people don't like to go to certain places. I get it. I hate driving a car in certain places. I haven't driven a semi-truck since I lived on a farm 20 years ago. So it's been a long time for me. And I can't even imagine. I was driving on country roads, with no traffic. And I just can't even imagine what it's like driving in New York City and the East Coast and all the tolls and things like that. But what I'll tell you is the best paying freight and the best, most profitable drivers go back and forth where people live. And I was just at a very large carrier last week, and their top drivers, they run from Chicago to the Northeast and back pretty much exclusively. The tolls are high, the fuel costs are high, but the rates they're getting are the highest, and they've calculated that and they've figured that out. So I know winter is coming here. I know it's going to get tougher, but the best freight is where people are, and there's no other way around that. So the bottom line, and I say it right here at the last of this first bullet point, is you have to maximize your revenue per day. When you're picking a load, that's the simplest way to do it. Get with us. We can help you calculate everything to your contribution margin, and we can really get down into the details. That's what you should be doing. But if you want to take the easy route, you figure out how to get the most revenue per day to your truck. That's how you're going to make the most money, is maximize your revenue per day to the truck when you're choosing loads. I had a lot of questions about fuel. And so understand your company fuel routing software, or know where the alternatives are if it isn't ideal. And so the reason I say that is a lot of owner-operator carriers out there, they do I don't know if it's the right thing. It is the right thing. They do the right thing, and they pass on everything to you, meaning they give you the full fuel surcharge and they pass on the full fuel discount. And so those big carriers out there that have thousands of trucks, if they're giving you their full fuel surcharge, they're giving you their full fuel discount, and they're giving you their fuel routing software, you should use that. That's going to make you the most money, because they've spent tens of millions of dollars to make that for their company trucks, and they're giving it to you for free. So it's going to factor in fuel taxes and which state to fuel, the best pumps, you name it, go do that. Not every company does that, though. Not every company gives you the full fuel surcharge. Not every company gives you the full fuel discount. You need to know that. You need to figure it out. And then you need to compare that to some of those alternatives. ATBS has a great fuel card article. Just search ATBS fuel card. There's great fuel cards. There's great apps out there. If you're not getting the full fuel discount or you're out on your own, go look and shop around, because there's some good stuff out there and it keeps getting better. There's a lot of competition and you can do well. Always run your business off your P&L. And then again, know your costs. Know your fixed cost per day, your variable cost per mile. Know your contribution margin. Couple last things, because we're running out of time here. What are the most common questions I heard? When is freight going to turn around? We don't know. Unfortunately, we don't know. The thing in the world right now is that it's still uncertain. People are still spending less money. Freight is still down year over year, but drivers are still failing out. So it seems like we're at equilibrium. Things aren't going to get worse right now, but they're not going to get better soon either. They could go up slowly. I keep hearing middle of next year, second half of next year. I've been hearing that for 3 years now. I'm tired of saying that. I don't know when things are going to get better. I don't know when things are going to turn around. What you can do is you can control what you can, which is picking the right loads, which is taking that extra load, which is controlling your fuel costs and keeping your truck up to spec and getting it run. What are the best lanes to run freight? I had a lot of questions about what are the best lanes, and I'm not going to click on this article, but again, search this, ATBS, best and worst states for outbound freight. We have a very comprehensive article from our friends at truckstop.com that says where the most freight is in every segment, dry van, flatbed, refrigerated, you name it. Go search this article, find it. We have the best and worst states for outbound freight. Use that to your advantage. And then a lot of people were asking, I'm new to being an owner-operator. How do I succeed? I just talked about it. You got to know your numbers. You got to put your head down and you got to shut the door and you got to move right now. The best owner-operators are running harder than ever. They're running lanes they probably didn't want to, but have figured out how to make a lot of money at it. And they're watching their costs. And by doing all that, even in a down market, they're succeeding like they never have in the last couple of years, and they're accelerating in how they're succeeding. And if they keep these business practices up, it's going to keep getting better for them.